Hello everyone. This is the 8th part of the story, Abe the Wizard. Chapter 39, A Knight's Secret Techniques. Due to the recent attack of the orcs, the city owner Viscount Dickens had been feeling stressed. As a great knight, Viscount Dickens would much rather take his sword out and slash the team of orcs that had entered Harvest City. He would like it much more than sitting in the city palace, hearing news about his citizens or other castle owners being attacked by the orcs. Yesterday, Viscount Dickens had received a dead body of a wargen and a map, sent from Harry Castle. After a bit of investigation, he found that the maps depicted the gathering location of the orc squad. The orc squad would gather up in a few days and get ready to leave the human world with their flying beasts. This meant that the attack was almost over. If Viscount Dickens did not take action now to seek revenge, as a Viscount of the Duke, he would be badly embarrassed. It would affect his status. This morning, Viscount Dickens had already ordered a troop of 1,000 to ambush at the location marked on the map. This time, Viscount Dickens had dispatched 3 elite knights and 30 knights. This small troop of 1,000 was an elite troop. They possessed enough fighting power to withstand a small-scale battle. According to the Knight of Marshal's letter, this information was obtained by his adopted son, Master Blacksmith Abel, after killing a wolf rider with a bear trap. Viscount Dickens was very intrigued by this new Master Blacksmith of Harvest City. As far as he knew, this Master Blacksmith was awarded the title of Master through forging magic weapons. Viscount Dickens has been considering whether he should ask this new master to forge a magic weapon for him. "My lord, someone from Matthew Castle wants to come in and report a funeral," said the butler. When Viscount Dickens heard these words, he knew that another castle had been attacked. He then said to the butler, "Let him in." After a while, a lost and frightened servant entered. He cried as he came in, "My lord, Lord Matthew and every single member of his family had lost their lives in the orcs' attacks." The abolishment of a noble family was not a trivial matter. Viscount Dickens knew about the Matthew family. Although they were very small, with only inherited around 100 square miles of land, they still had around 100 years of history. "Quickly, tell me what happened," said Viscount Dickens. Perhaps it was because of trauma or the lack of experience, but the servant had not explained the matter clearly. He continued to speak with a stutter. It was no use. Under normal circumstances, if Lord Matthew wanted to report something to Viscount Dickens, he would send his butler Ken, or he would even direct go to the city palace himself. As a result of this attack, the butler could no longer leave Matthew Castle. Therefore, they could only send a more well-spoken servant, one who was capable of reporting the current situation. The servant understood the intent of Viscount Dickens. At this time, he also remembered what butler Ken had told him. It was said that, upon arriving at the city palace, get to the point as soon as possible. The city lord would not have time to slowly listen to you. The servant proceeded to explain, in the evening, a group of wolf riders attacked the castle. The gates of Matthew Castle was opened, and the wolf riders entered. When they began their massacre, Master Abel was passing by, and he helped us defend them together. After Master Abel made sure the castle was organized again, Butler Ken ordered me to report to the lord of the city. Finally, after all that mumbling, the servant was able to explain the situation clearly. Master Abel again? Viscount Dickens did not expect that at all. These kinds of actions, such as rescuing a noble family in danger, were appreciated and respected by all nobles. Although Abel failed to save the life of Lord Matthew, the castle was still completely preserved. If an orc attack was successful, they would kill all the people they could find and burn the castle down. Master Abel must be rewarded for this deed, as well as for providing the orcs' gathering map. If the ambush was successful, these two deeds combined would be enough for extra rewards from the king of the duchy. These military service rewards were very difficult to be called off by anyone. Because even if the king was daring enough to reject it, he would have to risk having his citizens give up on fighting for him in the future. All the nobles and the king understood this by heart. Although throughout these years, the king had tried to suppress the influence of the nobles, if they were qualified for an outstanding military service reward, they would always be rewarded in a way that was equitable to their service. I will send people to Matthew Castle. You can go back now, Viscount Dickens said calmly. After the servant left, Viscount Dickens thought of Master Abel again. He must repay Master Abel well. A young master of his age must have extraordinary achievements in the future. If Abel needed any help, Viscount Dickens would definitely do his best to help him. By doing so, it would definitely yield a good return in the future. In fact, normally a native person who had attained the title of Master Blacksmith, such as Abel, would at least be given a lord position to persuade him to serve the duchy. However, Duchy of Carmel was a bit different when it came to that regard. Its king had always hated the nobles. The king could not care less about gaining or losing a lord or two. When Abel returned to Harry Castle, the first thing he did was play with Black Wind for a while. The small Mount Wolf, Black Wind, had recently gained a lot of weight. It has been eating very well, and every day it would enthusiastically run around in Abel's room. Abel did not want to bring it out to the public square, due to the recent attack of the orcs. Since the public square was full of people, many of whom would despise being near a mounted wolf. Due to the recent events, Abel never had the chance to have dinner with the Knight of Martial, until tonight since the orcs had now been driven away. The Knight of Martial could finally relax, and sit down to have dinner. After the two had finished their meal, the Knight of Martial called Abel to his study room. The maid poured and delivered 2 cups of coffee into the room. She added some spices to the Knight of Martial's coffee. However, when she was about to also add it to Abel's cup, she was stopped by Abel. "Abel, sometimes you have to tell yourself, it's your decision," said the martial knight as he began to smell the aroma of the coffee, and took a sip. He closed his eyes blissfully, enjoying the taste of coffee mixed with the spices in his mouth. Abel couldn't bear the sight of the Knight of Martial enjoying his spiced coffee. Just how were spices so trendy amongst the nobles? Luckily for Abel, the chefs in Harry Castle didn't add too much of it to his plates. If the taste got too extreme, he might even consider cooking his own meals from now on. Actually, no. Just to teach them a lesson, he might even start his own restaurant business. Whatever you say, Uncle Marshall. Abel, you are a master blacksmith now. Your forging ability has greatly exceeded my expectations. As you know, I am one of the oldest sons of the Harry family in Beikong City. Even I left my family since I got rewarded with a knight's estate. I was still allowed to learn about my family's inherent secret techniques of knights. You are my successor, I can bring you back to Beikong City to learn those techniques. But, of course, there are some techniques you can learn directly from me, said the Knight of Martial seriously. Abel had already learned some secret techniques of knights inherited by the Bennett family. However, since he was not an official knight, he could not apply most of those secret techniques. Moreover, if Abel was not already a level 5 novice knight, the Knight of Martial would not have told him any of this. The only secret technique that Abel had learned to apply from the Bennett family was the knight's breathing technique, which allowed the chi to be generated faster from to core and form a meridian. The other 3 pearls of wisdom he learned but he couldn't apply included the knight's acceleration technique, which was using combat chi to lift the speed of one's body. The knight's outbreak technique, which was enhanced one's outbreak power by 3 times, but the core would be weaker the following 1 hour. The solid defense, which could only be applied with a shield. It uses combat chi to connect the shield with the ground, creating an ultra-strong defense in one direction. Uncle Marshall, what secret techniques can you teach me now? Abel was not afraid of overloading himself with secret techniques. Since he possessed the power of will, he could learn almost anything much faster than anyone. So far, I've only known 2 secret techniques. One was the knight charging technique, and the other was the knight's mount acceleration technique. The Knight of Martial explained, these 2 secrets can only be used on a mount, and that's why I am so different from the Knight of Bennett. The Knight of Bennett believes that the most important characteristics of a knight are balance and diversity. That's why he spent his time mastering all kinds of common knight weapons such as big swords, shields, bows, long spears, and axes. On the other hand, I am an expert in horsemanship, big swords, and long spears. I believe that horsemanship is the only essential characteristic of a knight. For the weapons that I use, all I need is a big sword for close-distance battles, medium-distance battle I'll use long spears, and for long distances, I'll use a bow. With the mastery of these three weapons, I managed to attain enough outstanding military service to receive my own knight's estate. The Knight of Marshall did not deny that the Knight of Bennett's military service was not outstanding. This was because back then, the requirement for gaining the title of a lord was too high. As beginner knights, both the Knight of Marshall and the Knight of Bennett were way too insufficient to obtain such title. Chapter 40, Some Rumors About Wizards. Uncle Marshall, I will try to learn these secret techniques. I have black wind, so these two secrets techniques should be very easy to master. Of course, Abel understood the importance of horsemanship. Since he already owned an elite-level mount, all he needed now was the adequate skill set to match it. The Knight of Marshall did not avoid Abel's curiosity, he pressed the back of a knight biography novel on his bookcase. The knight biography novel fell inward, followed by a noise of mechanical gears triggering. The bookcase split into two, revealing a secret room. Come on, you have to know about this place. These are all the collections of Harry Castle, the Knight of Marshall said with a touch of pride. I've collected everything here through decades of hard work. Usually, I wouldn't even let anyone know this secret room, let alone showing it off. To a person who loved to show off, hiding things away was very difficult for the Knight of Marshall. But finally, today there was someone he would share it with. This secret room was huge. Countless weapons were hanging on the walls, which included those from both the orcs and humans. There even seemed to be a traditional elf's bow. As the Knight of Marshall saw that Abel was intrigued by the weapons on the wall, he began to sigh in awe. These are all from the enemies that I've slain throughout the years. After defeating an enemy, it didn't matter if you decided to kill them or not, keeping their weapons was a common practice among nobles, especially knights. They were trophies. Besides, every knight would most likely adore their collection as well. In the middle of the secret room, there was a huge long table. On the table, there were a few thick books with bold titles, including geography, agriculture, and some non-combat related secret techniques. For example, Abel was drawn by a book about how to use cleansing water. Abel had heard of cleansing water before. It was a potion often used by women to maintain their skin. But for a grown man in his 40s to use it? Abel frowned just by thinking about it. After the Knight of Marshall saw Abel's distaste towards the clearing water secret technique, he thought that he had to make an explanation. This is not just an ordinary formula for clearing water, it is the noble elf's cleansing water formula. Can't you see how good the elf's skin is? I spent good money on this book back in the days. Abel wanted to challenge the Knight of Marshall by saying that the elves' good skin was because of their genetic, not because of a beauty formula. Abel was very disappointed by this collection of the Knight of Marshall. Finally, Abel saw the two Harry's Heritage Secret Techniques of Knight's Guide placed at the very corner of the table. From the placement of these books, the cleansing water formula seemed much more important to the Knight of Marshall than his Heritage's secret techniques. Upon picking up the two secret technique guide, Abel was getting ready to leave the secret room. Suddenly, a square sign attracted Abel's gaze. The sign was engraved with some patterns that seemed very familiar with Abel. He was 110% sure this was a rune but did not know exactly which order was this rune. Abel walked towards the square sign and picked it up. He looked towards the Knight of Marshall and asked, "Uncle Marshall, where did you get this from?" "This was sent to me by a wizard friend. He said if I crushed this sign when I am in danger, it can help me shake off the enemy," the Knight of Marshall said after recalling for a while. "Wow, you have a wizard friend?" Abel widened his eyes. Abel had always only heard about wizards, but no one ever described them to him in detail. Yeah, when I was still in Baikong City, I rescued a wizard in a mission. At that time, his magical power was exhausted, and there were a few wolves nearby. When the Knight of Martial thought of a wizard in such an embarrassing situation, he gave a small chuckle. He then proceeded to say, the wizard and I later had become friends. He was still a novice wizard at the time, and since he knew I would be going to the battlefield, he paid a big cost in exchange for this rune sign, to save my life when the time comes. What is the difference between a wizard and a knight? Abel asked. The difference? The wizards can only use magic, so their power doesn't have many practical uses, but the best thing about being a wizard was longevity. Martial Knight's eyes flashed a hint of envy and then went on to say, the lifespan of a lesser official wizard can reach up to 300 years, and each time they level up, it will further increase the life expectancy. But knights like us, even if we became an elite knight, we can only increase our lifespan for 50 years. 300 years old. Abel's eyes were burning with intense yearning. He immediately asked, how can I become a wizard? It is not easy to become a wizard. First of all, there must be a middleman. The wizards are disconnected from the people of this world. They are not your down-to-earth average citizens. Things like family, country, and ethnicity don't seem to concern them a single bit. Ordinary people have no way of approaching them, let alone being a part of them. To become a wizard, you have to possess the right aptitude, it's the most important thing. Therefore every person who wants to be a wizard must pass an examination. The Knight of Martial saw the yearning in Abel's eyes. He couldn't help but smile. When I first discovered that the lifespan of an official wizard was 300 years, I also asked my wizard friend to help me become a wizard. But, I didn't pass the examination. The Knight of Martial was a bit stunned, but soon he began smiling again and said, if you want to participate in the wizard examination, you have to wait until you are 15 years old. By that time I will bring you to my wizard friend to ask for advice. If you can pass the examination, your achievements will surpass all knight. This was the most gratifying thing Abel had heard these days. If he became a wizard, he could not only live longer. He could also be able to use the Tome of Town portal from the Horadric box, which required magic, and the only way to use magic was becoming a wizard. Why must I be 15 years old before I can take the examination? Abel asked, eagerly. I heard that it is because no one below the age of 15 can understand the mystery of magic. Also, your body isn't developed enough to absorb magical power. The Knight of Martial knew what was on Abel's mind. He then went on to say, I will take you to the examination as soon as you turn 15. It should take some time before we can get to Baikong City, and by the time you finished learning some of my heritage's secret techniques, you should be around 15 years old. Through these words of the Knight of Martial, Abel understood how much the knights concern and cherish him. Even little times like this was taken into account. Abel was preparing to put the rune sign back on the wall. The Knight of Martial waved his hand at him and said, since you seem very interested in this rune sign, you can keep it. All these years it had just been sitting here, I never have the chance to use it, so let's not let it goes to waste. Thank you so much, Uncle Martial. Abel happily put away the rune sign, which would also be very helpful when it comes to studying runes. No worries. The Knight of Martial patted Abel's head intimately, and the two left the secret room. When Abel got back to his room, he realized the Knight of Martial's birthday would be in 10 days. The present he prepared initially had already been received early by the Knight of Martial. However, Abel would still feel very sorry if he didn't show any appreciation during the knight's actual birthday. He had to start preparing another present now. Abel practiced a bit of the knight's breathing technique for a while in his room and analyzed the battle he had today. The orcs had to be mobile and kept a fast pace in the human world. They could not wear any heavy armor, let alone carrying a shield. Therefore, that's where the composite bow, or the so-called Harry's bow, could shine. To forge a bow according to the methods of this world, other than using some extraordinary material, it was impossible to forge a 400-pound bow. This was because no material with the length and thinness of a normal bow arm could withstand 400 pounds of tension. The composite bow, on the other hand, had a shorter bow arm, and all the other parts were made with steel. It was an extraterrestrial technology, a device that was meant for mass murder in a world in its cold weapon era. Unless if a wolf rider possessed extreme power, if they didn't have armor or shields, they would most likely be killed by the hairy bow. The only downside was that the force required to pull on the hairy's bow was very demanding. Even a level 5 novice knight such as Abel could barely do it. That aside, the most important thing was that Abel had finally gotten the information he wanted about wizards, and he would soon be able to participate in the wizard's examination. Although he still needed to wait another 2 years. He decided to dedicate these 2 years to double down his effort on becoming a knight. It didn't matter if he was going to become a wizard or a blacksmith in the end. Whatever his future might be like, a strong body would always be appreciated. Chapter 41, A New Rune. Abel took out the rune sign from his bosom. According to the Knight of Martial, the rune sign was designed to repel away enemies. Only the number 4 rune, Neph, fit the description to cast such a special ability. The 4 #Neph was meant for chasing enemies away. Once cast, it would deal plus 30 defense against ranged attacks. This was the first time that Abel had seen a rune in this kind of form. Both runes had a very different method of usage, it was very similar to the runes in Diablo II. However, the runes from Diablo II were required to be equipped onto the equipment before it was able to function. On the other hand, the runes in front of Abel needed to be crushed before using them. Abel picked up the rune sign and studied it carefully. He didn't know what material it was made from. The rune sign looked like it was made from stone or wood, but as Abel inspected closer, they weren't. So Abel couldn't even uncover what it was made from, and there wasn't anyone to ask. The runes above were written in pretty much the same way as the dwarf spellforging book, except that it was missing some kind of runic circuits. Furthermore, it wasn't powered by any gem, so Abel couldn't even figure out how the rune was gaining its power from. At first, Abel had looked down on the technological advancements of this world. However, now that he had once again witnessed the purpose of these runes, as well as discovering the legendary 300 years lifespan of the wizards, Abel began to realize, this world's civilization was developing in a direction completely different from his old world. Abel realized something here. In this world, technology was not meant to be convenient nor helpful for the average people. Even the smartest researcher was more focused on theories alone, let alone focus on things that could raise the standard of living of the society as a whole. Just think about it, almost everyone on Earth had ways to make fire. But in this world, the wizard could stretch their hands, make fire with a spell. And since that was the case, no one bothered to find better ways to do things. Even if the elites managed to innovate, all the benefits would just go to themselves and not anyone else. From what Abel had heard from the Knight of Martial, the wizards didn't question what ordinary people could do, and ordinary people often had a very hard time communicating with wizards. What Abel didn't realize was that the runic sign he despised was a very valuable item to that novice wizards. These wizards were known for using such expensive items. As Abel slowly traced the runes from the rune board onto the sheepskin with his rune pen, he carefully contrasted every detail to perfection and precision. The next morning, Abel completed his basic knight training and handed Black Wind to his butler Lindsay. After he had his breakfast and headed out directly to the temporary blacksmith guild. The Knight of Martial decided to wait until the orcs' gathering time on the map to finally announce the end of the orc attack. As Martial hasn't made the announcement yet, the castle was full of leaders. During these times, the servants of the castle were very busy as they had to prepare 2 meals for so many people. In this world, most people other than the wealthy and nobles, usually only had 2 meals a day. After paying a large amount of tax on the exports of the land, there wasn't much left for themselves. With Harvest City being the fiefdom's primary source of the granary as well as Knight of Martial being the lord of the castle, he had to distribute a large number of provisions for the general public around the area. As Abel passed through the public square, people bowed to him from the side of their makeshift tents. He always nodded back to them with a smile. These kind gestures and actions from Abel ignited rumors that Master Abel, the successor of the Lord, was a kind, peaceful and loving man. As a result of these rumors, it filled the leaders with hope for the future. After Abel entered his operations room, he took out a forged sword of 100 skills that already had a groove on the sword handle. According to the Magical Weapons Forging Guide, the fundamental material required to make the 4 main magical runes ink was similar. The only difference was that fire magic runes ink were mixed with fire-type plants. Ice magic runes ink were mixed with ice-type plants. Electric runes ink were injected with electric eel's blood, and toxic runes ink were injected with venomous snake venom. As for making the runes ink that was capable of repelling attacks, Abel wanted to keep the same fundamental materials in all 4 of these runes ink but removed all the other materials that had special properties. There were all sorts of materials within the operations room since Master Bentham has collected various materials for many years, and after Abel had successfully forged the magic weapon, Master Bentham was able to post material requests from the Mercenary Union, which allowed him to gather even more fresh materials. This wasn't the first time Abel was making the rune ink, but this time there was no detailed configuration description. He was only able to create this ink according to the previous configuration experience while exploring new variants. By subtracting several materials as would have changed the balance of the configuration process. To precisely and correctly configure the new ink, Abel needed to find out the new balance point of these materials. 1 portion of lost spirit grass, 1 portion of breadfruit, 20 drops of bitter almond oil, 12 drops of holly oil, 10 drops of jungle frog blood, 8 drops of rosemary, 12 drops of eucalyptus, 5 drops of lemon essence, and finally pure water. As all the materials were taken out, Abel had to think twice about each of the material that he put in, the fusion time of the front material, the release time of the back material, and the intensity of the fire. It was easy to determine the success of the ink. This world had a wizard characteristic formula. Abel's magic ink was one of them. If the configuration was successful, there would be a faint white light during the split second of the moment of success. As long as you saw the white flash, it meant that the ink had been successfully configured. After continuous tries of experimentation in attaining the successful configuration, Abel conducted a method commonly used by previous generations of scientists, which was to record his every move of the steps he made and timed himself with an hourglass and recorded down any useful or related information. Abel was very patient with his research. Every attempt after the previous, a small change was made according to the previous record. In one day, although the configuration of ink was not successful, Abel's configuration level had made great progress. He had improved tremendously throughout the day. When Abel realized that he only had enough materials for tomorrow's experiment, he went forward to his steward, Lindsay, and asked him to arrange some mercenaries from the Mercenaries Guild to collect some materials back for him. The second day of the configuration with the runes went comparatively smoothly. At the 86th attempt of Abel's experiment record, there was a flashing white light on the rune pen. Abel could not help but admire those who have studied and researched the 4 runes. This was because Abel didn't invent a new formula. Instead, he removed some of the materials from the original formula and compared it with the previous formula, all while conducting scientific experiment methods. It took him 86 times to finally succeed, and he took more materials to attain the correct configuration as well as he didn't compare them. But he could hardly imagine how much time they took to research to get these results. Looking at the ink on his hand, Abel was filled with a sense of accomplishment. If the experiment is successful, the value of the rune ink in his hand would worth even more than the 4 main types of rune ink. This was because the ink in his hand had no special properties and could be used more widely. Abel took out his rune brush and began to draw the runes. It was like a walk in the park to him at this point. He expended his power of the will. The sword of 100 skills had been magnified multiple times in his eyes. The rune brush moved smoothly on the back of the blade. This time, he even added a few extra rune energy roots to the old rune formula to maximize the energy delivered. Throughout these months of forging the Sword of 100 Skills and writing magical runes, Abel realized his power of will had increased a little. Normally, Abel's power of the will would be completely drained after completing a magical rune, but this time he still had a little bit left. However, the difference was so insignificant, ordinary people can't notice it. Abel was very excited by this discovery. He always relied on this mysterious power of the will, yet he never knew that he could increase it. If it kept on increasing in the future, it would be very beneficial to his study of runes. Abel knew that these runes in front of him could be combined into the rune language Ancient Vow. However, one challenge he faced was that all 3 runes in the rune language Ancient Vow always had to be drawn in one sitting. Abel always thought he won't have enough power of the will to do it, but now, he finally had a glimpse of hope. Abel knew deep down in his heart that he was only 13 years old. The power of the will would gradually increase as he gets older. Especially now that he had discovered a way to exercise his power of the will, he would be able to draw the rune language Ancient Vow. For the choices of gem to be put onto the sword handle, Abel picked a diamond that was made from 3 steel gems. Diamonds were known to be one of the most beloved stones in this world for women. To them, it was a symbol of love and fidelity. However, for Abel, he chose the diamond because it had no attributes, and it was the purest gem out of the bunch. Chapter 42, Attributeless Sword. The crucial part would come when Abel placed the gem into the gap. Yes, once he did so, he would have to guide his own power of the will through the energy path. There were only 2 exploding big swords and a scroll of town portal in Abel's Horadric Cube. During his battle with Simon the Wargen, he used one exploding big sword, and he hadn't made a new replica ever since. Luckily for him, if he failed this time, he could just throw the product into the Horadric and fuse the 3 swords into one big sword. By this point, Abel gained a lot of experience when it came to guiding the force of the gem to the center of the rune. After about half an hour, however, this rune he drew didn't seem strong enough to do the job. The outer strokes of the rune began to turn red, and soon it melted and vanished. After it had melted off, the power of the gem began to disappear as well. It wasn't like it was the first time that Abel had failed. Oddly enough, though, the problem seemed to be with the rune ink this time. But it shouldn't have been. When Abel was mixing the rune ink, it was shining in white sparkles, which meant that the ink formula was right. Was it because the rank of the rune ink was not high enough? Was the gem simply too powerful? Abel evaluated for a bit. He was already using the best ingredients for the rune ink. It didn't seem possible to find any better ingredients. Abel kept on thinking. In the dwarf's magical weapon forging guide, there was rune drawing instruction and rune ink formula for weapons of every attribute. Actually, not for the attributeless runes. Abel could not figure out why. After all, they should be the easiest ones to make. But actually, even the dwarfs could not help it. The ingredients required to make attributeless rune ink were too hard to obtain for ordinary people. Hardly anyone apart from the wizards could supply them, which was why the dwarves wouldn't even bother putting it in their magical weapon forging guide. Ordinary runes ink only drew its energy from one attribute source. However, these so-called attributeless runes ink had multiple sources. In other words, it was a mixture of all the existing attributes. It was also much more potent than other types of runes. Therefore, normal ingredients for rune ink could not withstand it, and that's why things like the rune strokes melting off had happened to Abel. Abel took out the rune sign from his chest pocket. It was said that this sign could evoke the attacking power of an attributeless rune, which meant that these attributeless runes could be used. However, the only problem was that Abel didn't know what kind of ink was used to write this rune. Furthermore, this rune seemed to be its source of energy. Since the rune was still visible in the sign, it had to be supported by some unknown energy that Abel was unaware of. Abel had an idea. If the normal potion could be combined to make a potion of higher ranking, could he do the same with rune ink? At that moment Abel felt a passion burning within him. If it was about the two exploding sword within his Horadric Cube, he wanted nothing more than to throw them somewhere far away. They were useless to Abel since all they did was waste space for him to make new things with the Horadric Cube. After he had confirmed on his idea, he dug a deep hole outside the castle, and carelessly threw the two exploding sword inside. Bang! It was like a walk in the park. Abel thought that he should have just done this earlier. After Abel had returned to his workshop, he took out the scroll of town portal from the Horadric Cube, and carefully placed it in a metal box. These are the most important possessions of Abel. If he wasn't in need of combining something, Abel would often keep the scroll of town portal in the Horadric Cube. That way both of these treasures could stay in the same spot and be safe. Abel took out some more ingredients. He made 3 attribute-less ink according to the formula and threw them into the Horadric Cube straight away. In a flash of white light, these 3 rune ink disappeared without a trace. In the top left corner of the Horadric Cube, a new bottle of the rune ink began to appear. It was a success. This opened up a large potential for things Abel could do with the Horadric Cube in the future. But little did he know, the value of this rune ink was so much higher than most things available for purchase in this world. The dwarves would be willing to trade countless exotic gems for something like this. Abel picked up this new bottle of rune ink and dumped it into a darkness-style crystal bottle. The bottle was shimmering in blue sparkles. From past experience of combining potions, Abel knew that this was an intermediate rune ink, and all the ones he had used before were all basic levels. Abel took out an almost finished model of a sword of 100 skills and began to draw the rune on it straight away. He had gained experience in drawing this rune from the last attempt, so this time it was a lot faster. However, using intermediate rune ink required a lot more power of the will. After he had completed, he once again felt that knees-weakening lethargic feeling. It reminded him of the time where he drew his first rune. Abel rested for a while. As soon as his power of the will was recovered, he immediately placed a gem into the sword handle. He then used his power of the will again and guided the energy from the gem to the rune. This time, Abel was actively guiding the energy throughout the rune. It wasn't like he had full control of it, however. He did not expect the speed of the energy to travel so fast. A large amount of it shot out from the gem towards Abel's power of the will, like a car speeding on a highway. Luckily, Abel reacted on time. He also sped up his reflex in using the power of the will, and almost finished the guiding process with a little less than 10 minutes. Abel's eyes were fully fixed on the magic sword in front of him. It was shimmering in blue sparkles, but it was not the type of blue from those ice magic swords. If you looked at it carefully, you would notice it was actually the same blue sparkles as the bottle of intermediate rune ink. The blue sparkles swam around in the strokes of the rune for a while, and slowly faded away. Abel stared at this magic sword in his hand. These blue sparkles. Does it mean that this magic sword had a higher rank than all the other ones? Abel thought to himself. No one could give him a straight answer for that. Up to this point, Abel had been the only one who was doing the investigating and experimenting. Abel waved this attribute-less magic sword around. It felt just like the normal ones, and its uses should be the same as well. He then chopped up some firewood with the sword. Again, it felt just like all his other swords. Nothing special really happened. Abel put the scroll of town portal back into his Horadric Cube and left the operation room caring for his new magic sword. Have you seen the Knight of Martial? Abel stopped and asked Steward Lindsay, who was busy with his own tasks. Young master, the headmaster was in the training room, Lindsay replied, to which Abel thanked him and headed for the training room. The butler Lindsay smiled as he watched Abel walked away. He was very proud of this young master. With only 13 years of age, Abel was unlike other noble youngsters who only cared about living a lavish lifestyle. Everyone knew that Abel was a genius, but who knew just how much effort and dedication this young master had put into his work. Steward Lindsay had seen many noble youngsters throughout the years, and none of them had the dedication of young Master Abel. After the young master became a master blacksmith, all he did throughout the days were making things in his workshop. Not many people other than Steward Lindsay knew about this. Also, not a lot of people knew that the Knight of Marshall's favorite ice magic sword, the castle savior Harry's bow and the 2 gigantic bear trap that captured a few giant beasts trying to enter the castle, were all handiworks made directly from the young master himself. Maybe when Abel had become an adult, Harry's knight estate would already become Harry's lord estate. With Abel in the house, there was no limit in the potential he could bring to those around him. Abel, on the other hand, didn't seem too concerned about what Lindsay was thinking. Now, all that he could think about was to test the new magic sword with the Knight of Marshall. The moment when Abel had entered the training room, he could already hear the sound of a big sword slicing through the air. It seemed like the Knight of Marshall was practicing his basics. Abel did not interrupt the man. Instead, he simply watched from the side and waited for the Knight of Marshall to finish. The Knight of Marshall was practicing the basics. Yes, the basics, but Abel could feel the impact of the swings from several meters away. The Knight of Marshall was putting his entire strength into his swings, which was contradictory to the never go all out rule he had often heard on Earth. While he continued to watch the Knight of Marshall practicing his moves, Abel started imagining inside his head. He began to imagine what would happen if he was standing in front of the Knight of Marshall. This marks the end of part 8 of the story, Abe the Wizard. Thank you for listening. Please like the video and hit the subscribe button to listen more. Hit the bell icon to get notified of all the new content uploaded to the channel ASAP.